Subtitles. Subtitles created by Dima Torzak. Subtitles created by Dima Torzak. Subtitles created by Dima Torzak.
Welcome to the Politeka channel. Thank you for joining us today. Please like and subscribe to the channel. Leon Weinstein joins us today. Hello, Leon. We're glad to have you.
Good afternoon. I'm glad to be invited.
Well then, Trump finished his speech at the United Nations General Assembly, exceeding the allotted time by as much as 45 minutes. Let me remind you that each leader, according to the rules set by the President of the General Assembly, is given a 15-minute limit. Trump's speech lasted nearly an hour. He says that I was right about everything. I'm really good at predicting events. I even have a cap that says Trump was right about everything. As they say, no one has ever praised themselves at the United Nations like Trump. But I want to talk to you about some rather important things that Trump touched on in his speech. First of all, he accused the United Nations of embezzling billions of dollars on the renovation of the Secretariat building and called its activities ineffective and wasteful. These statements aren't being made for the first time. Even during his first presidency, the United States froze part of the funding for international organizations, accusing them of bureaucracy and corruption. What message is Trump sending now, and what consequences could this have for the organization itself and for the world order?
Well, I really hope they shut it down because it's absolutely pointless. And I'm not saying this just now after Trump's speech, but I've probably been saying it for about 15 years, speaking at various forums and also on the internet, on my own channel. Why is it even needed? No one understands, because honestly, I can't even think of what it actually does. Well, for example, not a single conflict that's happened in the world today. In theory, it's supposed to be created to solve problems and, so to speak, to make sure conflicts are resolved. It hasn't resolved a single conflict. Armenia, Azerbaijan, for example, India, Pakistan, for example, and so on. If it doesn't have the means or leverage to resolve conflicts, then what's the point of it? If it does have leverage but doesn't use it, then what's the point of it? And secondly, just imagine these so-called blue helmets lining up somewhere in between Ukraine and Russia. Only Russia advances. They flee right away because they can't handle it. Even with blue helmets and their presence, they can't hold anyone back. And further, and finally, but probably most importantly, the countries there don't vote according to their conscience, as it's written in the charter, to protect, promote, and so on. They vote according to their economic and political interests. There, 57 Muslim countries vote as a bloc, let's say. Why? It doesn't matter what our brothers do. What matters is they're our brothers. In the same way, basically, the West acts and the so-called South has long started to act the same way. The countries that try to, as they say, suck up to someone for some future relationships, vote the way their masters want, well, those who want to. For example, Ukraine. Ukraine took and voted. What does Ukraine want? It wants to liberate its territories, but they tell it no. There, you see, there's a strong enemy. There are many of them. They have a lot of guns, so you can't drive them out. And that's why you have to come to terms with the fact that you'll give part of your territory to this enemy, and they'll set up their own state or something else there. Yeah, well, you could say that. Ukraine should clearly understand that Israel is in the same situation, where part of its territory is occupied, and attacks are constantly launched from that territory. Israel is trying to remove those people. You could say Ukraine is aligned with others, with those from whom it expects money and assistance. Not because it thinks Israel shouldn't do this, but to Israel it says, no, go ahead and organize a state on your own territory so that you can be attacked. Why am I mentioning Ukraine? I'm not saying Ukraine is bad. So that your viewers and listeners understand that even their own country doesn't act from the point of view of, let's say, common sense. Well, it's clear that since 1948 there has been constant extermination of Jews in Israel, attempts to seize territory, and killings. The slogan, "From the river to the sea," means only one thing. If anyone doesn't know, I'll say it now. It means we will wipe out all the Jews living between the river and the sea. That's why you see everyone, including the country of Ukraine, votes in a way that's beneficial to them, not according to their conscience. If we already know how everyone will vote, what's the point of voting?
Well, that's an interesting point, because in the United States of America, they have traditionally played the role of the main donor and arbiter. Is it possible to expect a revision of the very architecture of international institutions, and can we say that this is the last General Assembly?
No, we can't avoid the last General Assembly, because there are many deceived people, or rather, people who haven't looked into this seriously, who, most of them, I think, believe that somehow it's still needed, even though it just eats up money, and that's it. Neither the United Nations nor the United States has ever had an arbiter. Both have several arbiters. If it's about arbitration, Russia can veto too, so there's another arbiter. You can decide anything, but I can just say no, and everything collapses. So what's the purpose of this organization? Negotiations are generally only effective one-on-one, because even if I'm negotiating with you on behalf of my group, very often within my group there are completely opposite or just conflicting goals and ideas. How can I negotiate on behalf of a group that has different ideas, especially on a very specific issue? Yes, let's think together about how to develop gas fields here and there. But when it comes to broader issues, no, everyone has their own ideas. Every president thinks that either his country or himself, his family, and the bandits he rules with are the most important. And their interests are more important than those of the whole world or the oppressed. Who even cares about the oppressed? Who hears about what's happening in Darfur now? Who hears about what's happening in Africa? How many people have been killed there? No one cares at all, so let's not pretend it's disgusting.
There are also some interesting statements about the climate and things like that. We'll discuss that later if we have time, but for now let's focus on the main points. Trump stated that the United States is ready to impose tough tariffs against Russia, but without Europe's participation, they won't be effective. Basically, nothing new, but considering that many European countries still depend on Russian gas and oil, how realistic is it to expect that the European Union would take such a step? Why is Trump emphasizing this again? And can we say that the United States, or rather Washington, is basically shifting the responsibility for the effectiveness of the sanctions onto Europe?
The day before yesterday, Ursula stated that the European Union will no longer buy energy resources from Russia, and will also not buy energy resources that were purchased from Russia, processed, and then resold by India and China. That is, to the same European Union. She said this, but there hasn't been a decision yet. What Trump just said, he's basically telling them, guys, keep talking, I don't care, why should I fight for you? Right? And if you're serious, as they say, put your money where your mouth is. And, excuse me, I'm translating a proverb from English. And let's act together, because I won't fight for you alone. In that case, I'll only look out for my own interests. Let's discuss global interests together. Subtitles.
On the other hand, you know what the question is? Well, let him talk to Orban, because Hungary is actually one of the main buyers of Russian oil, so he has a good relationship with Orban. As far as we know, he himself has stated this more than once.
But that's a personal relationship between the presidents and the prime minister. I think you're describing it correctly. When Trump says, I have a great relationship with the North Korean dictator, he doesn't mean what you just implied. I once managed a large company with about 20,000 employees. In fact, I've managed several companies, but that one was particularly big. In other words, the turnover was significant, and it was necessary to have good connections in the cities where the bases were located. This was, so to speak, import. That's why Japan, the United States of America, Ukraine, by the way, and so on and so forth. And we transported goods, we manufactured something there, we repackaged, so to speak, a bunch of different things. So if you somehow manage to get into a conflict with an official, then even if you're bringing him a bribe, it didn't make a difference. You still had a conflict with him. In order to have proper negotiations, you have to be on good terms. Everyone knows, brother, that you defend your interests and he defends his. Yes, your own, whether yours, your country's, or your department's, it doesn't matter. So, in order for your negotiations to succeed, you need to create the appearance of good relations. That's exactly what Trump is doing, having dealt with real estate gangsters his whole life.
Friends, write your opinion in the comments. And Trump says he was counting on a quick end to the war, considering again his good relationship with Putin. At the same time, he noted that many believed Russia would win in 3 days. How can such a position and such rhetoric be interpreted? Is this an admission of underestimating Ukraine, its resistance, or is it also an admission of their own incapacity?
In my opinion, Trump has proven his capability, so your last question puzzled me a bit. Well, let's take a look at Azerbaijan and Ukraine, and let's look at Congo and Rwanda. 6 million died there, far more than in Ukraine, so that war was more serious. And the situation when he resolved the conflict between India and Pakistan, so he was capable. You know, when a person has won, say, 20 fights and there's still one more he's fighting, to say that he's proven his incompetence is, well, at the very least, ridiculous. Trump has already proven his capability and no longer needs to. Trump's words can destroy countries. For example, he said something about Canada, and people in Canada started laughing and making fun of it. 2 provinces are leaving Canada and have completed preparations to join the United States of America. Because in the beginning was the word. Bella Trump's words showed them which direction to take. We don't want liberal Canadians in our union, but we will gladly accept these 2 provinces, which are the only ones. And they make money, and that's why they're right-wing, not left-wing. That's why they don't want socialism, which everyone else wants, taking their money and dividing it. And now, regarding your main question. Trump said, yes, I read it. I believe that both the leadership of Ukraine and the leadership of Russia were reasonable and thoughtful. Well, you know, Napoleon also conquered, and he was hated in Italy, and Genghis Khan wiped out entire cities. That is, throughout all of history for 6,000 years straight. Cain had to take something from Abel, or Abel from Cain, and boom, a rock to the head, and that was it. So it didn't start when Russia attacked Ukraine or Georgia. It started 6,000 years ago, 5,790, however many years ago that was. So Trump believed that there were pragmatic people on both sides. He found out that. And so he decided, guys, I'll give them such an amazing opportunity to cooperate instead of killing each other. Yes, of course, he miscalculated. He, just like Schwarzenegger did in his time, came and became the governor here in California. And after 2 or 3 days, he was asked, were there any, so to speak, surprises? He said, yes, there were. One surprise. I thought that actors, musicians, and other snakes. But compared to politicians, we are just little kids. So that's how Schwarzenegger underestimated that compared to politicians, actors are just little kids. In the same way, Trump underestimated that both the Russian leadership and the Ukrainian leadership have their own reasons to continue the war.
Live on. I'll get back to your analogy. Then the question arises, what's the difficulty if you fought 20 battles and only one is still ongoing? As Trump says, he ended 6 wars, but the war between Russia and Ukraine is still ongoing. What's the stumbling block?
Both governments, or leaderships, whatever you call them, don't want to end this war, each for their own reasons, and are doing everything to keep it going. Each country believes it is right and that its way is correct. For example, Ukraine not just wants to drive them out, of course they want that, that's clear. But they make ending the war conditional on Russia being expelled from all of their territory. They can't do this on their own. No one is going to do it for them. So in other words, this is an absolutely unrealistic task. Russia, in turn, can't make any progress. Because there was a brilliant speech by Zaluzhny in London. He explained what modern warfare is and how it has changed. So I explained exactly why neither country can move forward at this stage, neither one way nor the other. So Russia wants to get another piece of land to end the war, which it cannot conquer on its own. But who will do the conquering? Who else? Or just give it to me, right? Is that it? In other words, neither side has yet reached the point where they would say, that's it, stop. Let's end the war and actually figure out how to finish it. I understand that as I speak, people believe Ukraine is entirely right and Russia is entirely wrong, while those in Russia feel the opposite.
Yes, that's true. At the same time, Trump called China and India the main sponsors of the war because they buy Russian energy resources. How fair is such a statement, and can we consider this as a kind of signal for future pressure on Beijing and Delhi from Washington? And won't this lead to an even greater split between the West and the countries of the Global South?
Well, look, we've all started repeating these words, Global South, even though there's nothing global about it. Global means something common, complete, and so on. From my point of view, there has been an insanely strange unification of suppliers against their own consumers. This shocks me so much that I still think there's some kind of hoax in it. As soon as I started doing business, life started teaching me, so to speak, and the management taught me as well. I didn't work for myself for very long. Then it so happened that almost all my life I was inventing something, leading, organizing, and working. And so life has taught me that your greatest asset, your greatest asset, your greatest thing is your client. For the past few years, I've been involved in the gallery business. I supplied art to a number of galleries in the United States of America. And when I ask a gallery to tell me about themselves, the first thing they say is, we have a list of 5,000 buyers. We have a list of 30,000 buyers. Wherever they are, nothing else matters. Only one thing does. Here is this list of buyers who are loyal, whom you can reach out to and say something, or those who come to your website or to the gallery itself once a month to check. So what's new with you? They have tea with you, you share stories and do everything to make them want to return. So India is a supplier, there's no market there in India. There is a market, of course, but despite 1.4 or 1.5 billion people, it's like a market of 200,000 people in Europe. China also has 1.4 billion people, and 3/4 of the population can't even afford the sole of an Italian boot, so to speak. And Russia, essentially a gas station like countries lacking real markets. They can't just turn around and say, oh, we'll start selling to someone else now. Who are they going to sell to? Now the United States, European Union, Japan, and South Korea will all say, get lost. Who will they sell to and who will we buy from? We have many options. They're less organized, yes. And in 2, 3, or 4 years, we will completely switch to Indian, Chinese, and Russian goods, and we will move away from them. What will they do? They'll collapse exactly 1 year after we begin reducing. Their only option is war with us, but who would do that now? Maybe in 20 years, China might be able to, but they definitely can't now. We have 800 bases worldwide, or maybe just 2, I can't recall, but China has 5. How will they fight us? And so on. Besides, as soon as we cut them off from technology, neither Russia nor China nor India produce technology in their own countries. But when people from China, India, or Russia come to America, they somehow start creating new technologies, magically. So the situation is about culture. Inside America, this culture, call it whatever you want, the climate is good inside America. When people arrive, their creativity shows. Why? I can't explain it, but there are 2 places where people's creative abilities are revealed: Israel and the United States of America. There are no more. 1.4 billion people are sitting in India. How many Nobel Prizes in science has Russia received in the past 20 years? But America and Israel take all the Nobel Prizes there are in all the sciences. So something is happening with technology. As soon as something new comes up, where are the new phones made? Well, exactly. They're assembled in China wonderfully because the labor is cheap there, and you can make them work for 30 hours straight. In China, they won't complain. They'll be glad to be exploited. That's all. That's why the union of a gas station with a supplier against its own customers is shocking.
Great analogy, Leon. At the same time, if you put together all these statements and take into account the earlier criticism of Europe, the reproaches towards China and India, and Trump's hints about his own ability to quickly end the war, in your opinion, how will the American strategy be built now? Since today there was a publication in Reuters. It was earlier, but now it has appeared in the media already with a translation. Continued. It follows that in Kiev there is less and less hope for new tough sanctions from the United States against Russia. Overall, it is necessary to reconsider the strategy and focus on internal resources. So, how will the United States of America act in this context, and what should we rely on now, and what strategy should be built in Ukraine?
Ukraine doesn't have helpers. Ukraine has partial ones. A fellow traveler. Well, you can't really call England and the European Union fellow travelers. When, a day before the flight to sign the peace agreement in 1922 after the war had already started, after the initial shock in Russia, the complete astonishment from being pushed away from Kyiv, and so on, and so on. 3 things worked. So, the first is the absolutely incredible perseverance of the Ukrainian people. The second is that Zelensky didn't run away as Biden anticipated and even sent a plane for. Russia also expected it. And the third is that you got javelins from Trump back in the day. These are the 3 things. I know there were many other reasons, but these are the top 3 that stopped Russia. At that moment, Russia was so stunned that they were ready to sign. They were onerous and terrible, but Ukraine had already agreed to them in both the first and second Minsk. And Russia was ready to back down from its demands, the pre-war demands, and return to Minsk. With some variations, they were even willing to overlook that there would be a large army in Ukraine and so on, because they used to put forward and demand things like that before. At that moment, Boris Johnson arrives. Arakhamia, your guy, so to speak, told Zelensky all about this in detail, then tried to say that was it, he was done. Sorry, I sneezed, my nose itched, I apologize. Arakhamia told the whole story. Johnson practically confirmed it. He came to say, representing the European Union and Biden's America, keep fighting, don't end the war, we'll help you, don't worry. Everything will be fine, we'll defeat the Russians, etc. Etc. I won't get into why this was done right now. But what kind of friends are they, excuse me? Yes, they are friends, but they have their own goals. And Biden, who knew for 4 months straight that Russia would attack Ukraine from 4 sides. The date and number of soldiers were announced. He said 175,000, but about 155,000 actually attacked. He said they attacked from 4 directions at the end of January or start of February, and it happened in February. There was a slight delay, I don't know why. So, knowing all this for 4 months, neither the United States of America, nor Europe, nor NATO did anything. It would have been so easy to stop this. Bring in the 5th or 6th Fleet through Turkey, bring them to the Ukrainian shores, put the missiles back in Poland that Obama removed, even though they were there before, bring in 20,000 United Nations soldiers for joint exercises with Ukraine. And who would dare attack then? So they let them attack first, then they gave just enough weapons to hold on to a certain amount of land. But definitely not to advance, definitely not to crush the Russians, definitely not to drive the Russians out of Ukraine. Why? Why? Are your Ukrainian friends really such strange guys? So no, you can't count on anyone. You can only rely on yourself. And if someday those rose-colored glasses, or whatever they're called, come off, Ukrainians will realize that they're alone in the world. And you have to rely only on your own strength. That's it, nothing more. That's when real politics begin, and movement toward ending the war starts.
I'll ask you briefly about Europe as well. The Reuters article notes that Ukraine risks losing not only some American aid, but also support from Europe. This directly relates to your comment about fellow travelers. In your assessment, how great is this risk? Is the European Union ready to compensate for a possible reduction in American involvement? Or is there also growing fatigue and disagreement within Europe regarding the continuation of military support for Ukraine?
Well, military support for Ukraine, let's figure this out. I'm not here to argue, I just want us to understand each other, what military support for Ukraine really means. Until today, it meant supplying Ukraine with enough weapons so that Russia wouldn't capture Ukraine too quickly. Well, if you boil it down completely, yes, that's it. So Russia has significantly more weapons, they have more soldiers, they have more, so to speak, offensive capabilities, they have more of this and that. So if Europe wanted to, it would open up its reserves and give them to Ukraine, and would teach them, so to speak, and so on, and would lift all kinds of restrictions. It's very difficult to fight. You enter the ring, boxer, but with your right hand tied behind your back. Now please share as much as you'd like. All you can do is defend yourself and occasionally, timidly, put your left hand in your opponent's face. OP. I don't know what the goals are. They'll sell as soon as it's profitable. France will be the first to do so. Germany has its own ideas about this. Germany is afraid that Ukraine will grow if everything goes according to Trump's scenario, namely if there is some kind of border, a separation. They've reached that point, put up stakes, soldiers, and something else. They somehow came to an agreement with Russia that Russia won't attack in the next 10 to 15 years. I don't know how they agreed or what's happening. America has rights, the right of a lord, as it's called, to all kinds of minerals. That doesn't mean America has taken them away, it just means America has the right. First right of development. Okay. At first, they started bringing in billions, then tens of billions of dollars. They brought in a private army and began developing not only the extraction of minerals, but also production right on site. And what happens? Suddenly, in Ukraine, which is at the center of 100 million trained people, Poland, Ukraine, Slovenia, Slovakia, the Baltics, and so on, that's 100 million people who are being trained, already trained. Capable, not like the Papuans in New Guinea, capable of thinking, reasoning, trading, organizing, and learning. Ukrainian guys who do all sorts of programming there have proven themselves very well on the global market, so everything is great. And suddenly, Ukraine starts to develop a kind of hub, what you would call a place where everything grows, from mining resources to processing them and manufacturing products. Who will this hit? Asia first? Not at all. This will hit Germany and France first, and in some sense, northern Italy. But Italy is less nervous about it. But Germany and France will do everything possible to drag you in, the European Union, to give you 5, 10, 20 billion euros and sign a treaty with you about the fact that you won't compete with France and Germany. And your leaders, who will pocket $1 billion, will eagerly approve and proclaim, see how great it is to join the European Union. But in reality, everything will be done so that you don't become a competitor to these countries. In other words, to turn you into an appendage. Mineral resources, also known as natural resources, and so that your people would go to work for very little money in that same France. And the same thing they did with the Baltics, they forced them to burn their fishing fleet because according to the agreement, they no longer had the right to fish commercially. Well, that's what our friends and others like them want to happen.
Leon, to you. Last question. What or who does it depend on how and when the war will end?
Only on one thing, on when, at what moment. Ukrainian society, and with it the leadership. However, I don't know where to start. Will really understand. Will truly grasp the situation.
Friends, write your answer in the comments to this video as well. Don't forget to support our conversation with a like and subscribe to our project, and also to Leon's personal project. Leon Weinstein joined us on this program. Thank you, Leon, for your time and insights. We look forward to working with you again.
Goodbye.